The baby's cry shattered the hum of the first-class cabin. Not the soft, sleepy fussing of an infant tired of being in the air too long, but the sharp, full-throated wail of a newborn in distress. It cut through noise-canceling headphones and rustled linen napkins. A few passengers exchanged tight glances over glasses of wine. One woman pressed her fingers to her temple. No one dared say a word. Silas Moreau sat stiffly in seat 2A, his posture impeccable, his expression unreadable. His navy suit, custom-cut, expensive, old-world Southern, looked out of place on a plane more suited for a courtroom or boardroom. He held a small, writhing bundle against his chest, 10 pounds of exhausted, red-faced rage named Julian. Silas adjusted the blanket again, heart-hammering beneath his calm exterior. He bounced his knee slightly, a movement meant to soothe, but his hands betrayed him. Too rigid, too practiced. Julian only screamed louder. Across the aisle, a flight attendant offered a cautious smile. "Would you like me to warm the bottle again, Mr. Moreau?" Silas shook his head once. "We've tried. He won't take it." His voice was like polished oak, measured, worn, smooth with use, but lined with weight. The kind of voice that people listened to without question. But babies don't care about voices like that. The attendant nodded and slipped away. Silas turned toward the window, away from the eyes he could feel scanning him with a blend of curiosity and discomfort. He closed his own for a moment, just long enough to feel the knot in his chest tighten. It was always like this now. Days spent moving through shadow and structure. Nights filled with cries he couldn't quiet, reminders of a silence too deep to escape. He'd buried Leona 8 weeks ago. He still hadn't figured out how to breathe. Julian's scream cracked again through the cabin, and Silas felt it in his teeth. He reached for the pacifier, tried again, but the baby spit it out with an angry squeak and arched his back in protest. Across the aisle, 2 rows back, Rachel Connors blinked up from her untouched drink. Her chest ached. Not metaphorically, though there was that too. Her body still responded to the sound of a crying baby like it had 6 months ago. Breasts tightening, warmth blooming painfully behind her ribcage, a letdown reflex stubbornly refusing to forget. She glanced down instinctively, placing a hand over her chest, even though the pads she wore were still doing their job. For now. She hadn't meant to hear it. She'd tried to ignore it, had buried herself in her window seat with noise-canceling headphones and closed eyes, pretending the turbulence was the only reason her stomach turned. But when the crying hadn't stopped, when the flight attendant started whispering, when no one dared to approach the man with the crying baby, something inside her cracked. She pressed a knuckle to her lips, breathed in through her nose. 6 months since Emily. 6 months since her daughter's tiny heart had stopped beating in the night. 6 months since the NICU felt like home, and then felt like a prison. Now here she was, freshly returned from a grief and renewal retreat in Big Sur, and she couldn't even make it through one flight without being dragged into someone else's pain. The baby wailed again, sharp, helpless, hungry. Rachel's hands gripped the armrests. "Ma'am, soft voice." Another attendant, younger, uncertain, paused beside her. "Are you all right?" Rachel didn't answer immediately. She looked down the aisle. The man was rocking the baby now, his expression tight, his jaw rigid. There was no mother beside him. No second pair of hands. No warmth. "I'm a nurse," she heard herself say, voice low but clear. "Pediatrics. NICU. I think he's hungry." The attendant blinked. "He's refused bottles. We've offered 3. Rachel nodded once, trying not to let the ache in her chest distract her from the sharp thrum of instinct buzzing under her skin. "I still produce." she said softly. "I lost my daughter 6 months ago, and it hasn't stopped." She looked up, and for a moment she stopped being afraid of how insane she sounded. "If he'll let me, I could try." The flight attendant's eyes widened. "I know how that sounds," Rachel added quickly, already standing gathering herself before she could change her mind. "But he's suffering, and I can help. Let me speak to him." Rachel waited in the aisle, heart thudding, as the attendant approached the man. The baby's cries reached another pitch, almost breaking, and Rachel winced. Then the man looked up. Even from a distance, his presence hit her like pressure. Not menace, though there was something undeniably powerful about him, but density, like standing too close to a storm cloud that hasn't decided if it wants to rain. She met his eyes. They were the color of weathered steel gray, thoughtful, tired. Beneath the exhaustion, something flickered. Pain, panic, hope. He nodded once, and that was all. The attendant stepped aside as Rachel moved forward, careful, steady. Silas adjusted Julian in his arms, as if reluctant to surrender him, but more afraid not to. "Rachel Connors," she said gently. "I'm a nurse. I know that cry. I lost my daughter, but my body still..." responds. Silas didn't speak for a moment. He studied her like someone evaluating a risk. But then Julian cried again, a broken little sound, and the man simply said, "Please." They walked together toward the private restroom at the front of the cabin. Rachel felt every pair of eyes on her back. A surreal hush settled over the aisle, as if passengers sensed that something strange and sacred was happening. Silas lingered at the door, his large hand braced against the frame. "His name is Julian," he said. Rachel paused. "What's yours, Silas Moreau?" Their eyes met again. No secrets exchanged, but something passed between them. Shared loss. Mutual surrender. Rachel took the baby carefully. Inside the small, softly lit cabin bathroom, she sat on the leather bench and held Julian close. He writhed, whimpering now, his face red and wet with tears. "I'm here," she whispered, hands trembling as she unlatched the nursing bra she hadn't been able to bring herself to throw away. "You're okay now." He rooted instinctively, found her latched, and the crying stopped. Rachel closed her eyes. It hurt, it healed. She didn't know if it was Julian's sigh of relief or her own, but for the first time in 6 months, she felt useful. Not haunted, not broken, just needed. Outside the door, Silas stood still, not pacing, not commanding, just listening. To the silence, to the peace, and to the slow, quiet miracle happening 3 feet away. If you enjoyed this video, comment 1 to let me know. If not, comment 2. Your thought mattered to me either way. When Rachel stepped out of the restroom 15 minutes later, Julian was fast asleep in her arms. His tiny face relaxed, lips parted, breath soft and rhythmic. He was warm and heavy against her chest, the weight of him startlingly natural. Her blouse was wrinkled, her eyes glassy. She had no idea what she looked like, but she knew what she felt. Changed. Silas stood just outside the door. His suit jacket was gone now, sleeves rolled neatly to his elbows, revealing forearms that looked like they'd never held a child before this one. Yet the way he looked at Julian, protective, reverent, terrified, stopped Rachel mid-step. "He's asleep," she said quietly. "I can see that." His voice had that same low gravity. He held out his arms, and Rachel hesitated, not because she didn't trust him, but because she wasn't ready to let go. Julian stirred just as she passed him over. Silas adjusted the baby with an ease that suggested he'd been practicing. He rocked him gently, then looked at her. "You did something I couldn't," he said. Rachel cleared her throat. "I didn't expect him to latch. I just thought maybe it was worth a try." He nodded once slowly. "I'm grateful." She gave a small smile. "You don't have to be." I do. There was a pause. The kind that stretches just long enough to make your heart pick up. I should probably get back to my seat, she added. But Silas didn't move. He looked at her like she was something he hadn't planned for. Something fragile and confusing. Something that had just shifted the entire ground beneath his feet. I didn't catch your last name, he said. Connors. Rachel Connors. He repeated it under his breath like he was memorizing it. Rachel, he said again, his tone gentler now. You didn't have to help us. I know how strange this situation is. She gave a tired laugh. Believe me, I'm still trying to process it. And yet you did it anyway, because he needed something only I could give, she said softly, glancing at Julian. It wasn't a decision, really. It was just instinct. He studied her in silence, eyes narrowed just slightly. She could feel something shifting in the air between them, not flirtation, not yet, but recognition. As if they were standing at the edge of a road neither of them intended to walk down, but couldn't quite ignore. I owe you a proper thank you, he said. That's not necessary. It is to me. The flight attendant approached more cautious than before. Mr. Moreau will be descending in about 20 minutes. Would you like me to prepare anything? No, he said, glancing down at Julian. He's fine for now. Thank you. The attendant nodded and retreated, stealing a curious look at Rachel as she left. Rachel felt her skin warm. The unspoken assumptions were already stirring. She could feel them in the glances, the whispers, the odd silence when she and Silas stood together, a baby between them that didn't belong to her, and yet somehow did. She turned to go. Wait. His voice was softer now, almost hesitant. She turned back. You'll be landing in Asheville, he asked. She nodded. I live just outside of St. Louis, but yes, for now. He hesitated, as if choosing every word with care. Would you consider meeting again just for coffee? Or to talk? There are things I'd like to say without an audience. She tilted her head. Why? Because my son slept for the first time in 3 days. Because you were the only one brave enough to help him when I didn't know how. Because his eyes flicked away for a second, then back. I think you're someone I'm supposed to know. Rachel felt the sting of emotion behind her eyes, quick and unwanted. She blinked it back. She hadn't come here looking for anything. Not meaning. Not connection. And certainly not this. She searched his face. Is that your way of saying thank you, or is that something else? His jaw tightened, not in frustration, but restraint. It's me saying I'd like to see you again. But only if you'd want to. Rachel didn't answer right away. I don't know what this is, she said honestly. It's been 6 months since I've even looked someone in the eye without thinking about what I lost. And what I did for your son, what happened in that bathroom, wasn't something I've ever done before. It wasn't casual. It wasn't small. I know, he said, voice rougher now. It wasn't small to me either. The fasten seatbelt sign pinged overhead. Rachel looked up, startled to realize they were already beginning descent. The world was returning to itself, and whatever this strange bubble had been between them was about to break. You don't have to decide now, he added. But when you do... He reached into the side pocket of his carry-on and handed her a business card. No company name, just a phone number. A name embossed in clean silver. Silas Moreau. Rachel stared at it for a second before folding it into her palm. I'll think about it, she said. That was all. They parted in silence. The wheels touched down. Passengers stirred. The spell, such as it was, broke. Rachel gathered her bag with shaky hands, avoiding eye contact with the curious faces around her. She felt raw, like something had been scraped open and left exposed. As she stepped off the plane and onto the jet bridge, a breeze hit her face, and she realized she was crying. Not because she was sad, Because something had shifted. Something she didn't have a name for yet. Back in first class, Silas cradled Julian gently in his arms. The baby slept soundly, one tiny hand curled around his father's finger. Silas didn't look away from him for a long time. He wasn't a man who believed in fate, but he knew enough about legacy to recognize when it had just changed. Rachel sat motionless in the back seat of the rideshare car, the lights of Asheville casting soft glows on the wet pavement as the city welcomed her back, like it knew something she didn't. Her hand was still curled around the business card in her coat pocket, the name pressed into the cardstock as if that single object now held more weight than her suitcase beside her. She didn't know why she'd taken it. Or maybe she did. She hadn't said yes. But she hadn't said no either. As the car curved through the quiet neighborhood where she was staying, an old craftsman rental owned by a friend of a friend, Rachel, looked out the window at the neat houses, the porches draped with string lights, the kind of stillness that felt like a balm after months of internal noise. When the car stopped, she thanked the driver, stepped out, and stood still for a moment on the sidewalk. The baby's warmth was still on her shirt. The latch. The sigh. That tiny hand on her chest. She pressed her fingers against the spot and let her breath shake once before heading inside. The next morning she woke early, not because she wanted to, but because her body had learned long ago that grief didn't believe in sleeping in. The cottage was quiet, sunlight slipping in through gauzy curtains. She padded into the kitchen. Barefoot opened the fridge, stared inside, then closed it again. She didn't want breakfast. She wanted to stop thinking about him. But she couldn't. She kept replaying the look in Silas's eyes when he said, "I think you're someone I'm supposed to know." It wasn't a line. It hadn't felt rehearsed. It was said like a confession, and she hadn't told him no. By noon, she found herself holding the card again. She ran her thumb along the edge, then flipped it over and laughed quietly. No email, no address, just the number. Old school, private, intentional. Rachel set it down on the counter and backed away like it might burn her. That afternoon, her sister Mara called. Rachel picked up, already bracing herself. "Did you land safely?" Mara's voice was brisk, worried, loving in that tough older sister way that always left Rachel half grateful, half defensive. "Yeah, got in late last night. The cottage is nice. Quiet. You need quiet." "I know." There was a pause. Rachel could hear the clatter of dishes in the background. Mara probably had her hands full, husband, 3 kids, full-time job. And yet she still checked in, still carried a part of Rachel's weight like it was her own. "I had a moment," Rachel said finally. "What kind of moment on the plane?" There was a baby. Crying non-stop. Mara's voice softened. "And I helped him. His father couldn't get him to settle. I breastfed him." The silence on the line was sharp and immediate. "You what? I know how it sounds," Rachel said quickly. But he wouldn't take a bottle. He was so distressed. And Mara, I could feel it. I could feel the milk, the ache, like my body knew before I did. And I just offered. Rachel. It wasn't weird. It was instinct. It was kindness. I'm not judging. I'm just... That's a lot. I know, and the father who is. Rachel hesitated. Silas Moreau? That name sounds familiar. He's from Asheville, runs a land trust or something. Wealthy, serious, quiet. There's something about him. He carries this heaviness. You like him, Rachel exhaled. I don't know him, but you feel something. I feel like something cracked open. Mara didn't speak for a while. When she did, her voice had gentled. You've been so wrapped in grief, Rach. If this stirred something in you, if it made you feel again, maybe that's not a bad thing. Rachel closed her eyes. I didn't go looking for it. I know. But maybe it found you anyway. That night she sat on the small front porch, a cup of lukewarm tea in her hands, the mountains dark and quiet in the distance. The business card sat on the table beside her. She stared at it for a long time, then picked it up and pressed the numbers into her phone. She didn't call. She texted. Rachel. He slept like a stone. I didn't expect that. Hope you both got home safe. She stared at the screen. 3 dots appeared almost immediately, then disappeared. Her heart hiccuped. Then the response came. Silas, we did. Thank you again. I owe you far more than sleep. She waited a beat. Rachel, no debt. Just curiosity. Another pause. Longer this time. Silas, tomorrow. Coffee somewhere quiet. Rachel, afternoon, Silas. I'll send a place. 2 p.m. She stared at her phone thumb, hovering, then typed one final message. Rachel, bring Julian. The next day she arrived 10 minutes early to the cafe. Silas had chosen a tucked-away spot near the edge of the river, wood-paneled and filled with the scent of cinnamon and cedar. It was nearly empty. Perfect. She chose a seat by the window and waited. At exactly 200 Silas walked in. He wore a charcoal coat over a sweater, the kind of look that made him seem both casual and commanding. Julian was asleep in a chest sling, snug against his father's chest. When their eyes met, something clicked into place. He sat across from her slowly, as if aware the moment deserved quiet. I didn't think you'd come, he said. I wasn't sure I would. And now I'm still not sure. They both smiled. Silas glanced down at Julian. He's been quiet all morning. Slept through a call with the board, refused. 2 bottles? Cried for 10 minutes straight, then settled the second I put this on. He wants to feel close. He's smarter than I am. Rachel leaned in slightly. Tell me about his mother. Silas's eyes shadowed. He looked out the window, exhaled, then back at her. Leona died shortly after giving birth. Complications. Fast, unfair. He rubbed a hand along the baby's back. She was the strongest person I knew. Until she wasn't. Rachel nodded. I'm sorry. He met her eyes. I don't talk about her much. People assume I'm used to loss. Like legacy prepares you for grief. It doesn't. What legacy? He hesitated. My family built half the land outside this city. Old money, old customs. We learned to keep things in-house, suffering, secrets, success. All of it. Rachel watched him carefully. And now I want something different for Julian. There was something about the way he said it. As if every decision he made now was filtered through the lens of who his son might become. What about you? He asked. She looked down at her hands. I lost Emily 6 months ago. SIDS. No warning. She was 3 months old. Silas didn't move, but his expression cracked open. I still wake up expecting to hear her. I kept producing milk for months after. Everyone said it would stop. It hasn't. Silas was silent, the weight of her words filling the space between them. So when I heard Julian cry like that, her voice shook. It was like my body remembered before my mind could. He reached across the table not to grab her hand, but to rest his fingers against the edge. A silent gesture. An anchor. Neither of them spoke for a while. When Julian stirred, Rachel leaned in without thinking. Silas adjusted the baby but didn't pull away when she laid her hand gently on his back. I don't know what this is, she whispered. Silas looked at her. It's something. And in that small cafe by the river with grief between them and a sleeping child in their arms, something delicate began to take root. If you enjoyed this video, comment 1 to let me know, if not, comment 2. Your thought mattered to me either way. Rachel hadn't expected the envelope. It came 3 days after the coffee shop meeting. cream-colored thick, sealed with a wax stamp that looked like it belonged to another century. She turned it over twice before opening it, the slow tear of the paper sounding far louder in her quiet kitchen than it should have. Inside was a folded card with handwriting so precise it looked like calligraphy. Silas's handwriting. Rachel, if you're willing, I'd like to thank you properly. No crowds, no expectations. Just peace. Julian and I are hosting a small afternoon gathering at my family's home, just outside Asheville. Nothing formal, though the estate may try to convince you otherwise. We'd love for you to come. Sunday, 2 p.m. Sincerely, Silas. There was a second card inside, a note in different handwriting, rounder, bolder, slightly smudged ink at the bottom. He hasn't stopped talking about you. Neither of them have. Come hungry. Miss Hattie Rachel stared at the note like it might dissolve in her hand. She had questions, too many, really. What did this mean? Was it just gratitude? Or something growing beneath the surface? And why did the idea of stepping into this man's world feel more terrifying than feeding his child in an airplane bathroom? Still, she knew what her gut was telling her. She showed up on Sunday wearing a soft blue dress she hadn't touched since before Emily, something that made her feel like herself again. Not a nurse, not a grieving mother, just Rachel. The Moreau estate sat behind wrought iron gates and a line of old trees whose roots curled like secrets through the ground. The drive curved up toward a grand house that wasn't ostentatious so much as timeless. Brick ivy wraparound porches and quiet elegance. Like history had settled there and never left. Rachel parked and sat in the car for a full minute before stepping out. A woman appeared on the porch, wiping her hands on an apron. Older, with silver-streaked curls tied up in a bun and eyes that had clearly seen everything. "You must be Miss Rachel," she said, her voice warm slightly, southern and full of knowing. Rachel nodded, walking slowly towards the porch. Miss Hattie guilty. Hattie descended the steps and embraced her without hesitation, arms strong hold firm. "I've heard a lot about you. Julian's all but glued to that sling until he hears your voice. And Silas..." She leaned back and looked Rachel over. "Well, he's been quieter than usual, but not in the bad way." Rachel felt her nerves wrap tighter. Hattie seemed to notice. "Don't overthink it, baby. You did something kind. This is just a thank you. That's all. For now." She guided Rachel inside, and the first thing Rachel noticed was the stillness. The kind of stillness only old houses hold thick with memory, layered with the soft sounds of life still moving. She took in the foyer, dark wood floors, antique mirrors, a vase of lilies on a hall table. Then Julian cried. Not a scream, just a short, fussy bleat. Rachel turned toward the sound instinctively, and there he was. Silas stood in the archway of the sitting room, Julian cradled on one shoulder, wearing a pale linen shirt and jeans that made him look less like a legacy heir and more like a man trying to figure out how to be a father without instruction. "Sorry," he said with a quiet smile. "We were hoping to catch you before the tears started." Rachel moved forward, already reaching for the baby. "Hi there, sweet boy." Julian calmed instantly at her voice. Silas watched the change in awe. Every time. Rachel smiled as she took the baby. He remembers. They stood there for a beat too long to be casual, too short to be intimate. Just charged. "I'm glad you came," Silas said. "I almost didn't." Why Rachel glanced around the house. Because this is all so far from anything I've known, and because I'm not sure what you want from me. Silas studied her. "What if I said I don't know either? I'd believe you. But I do know this Julian needs comfort. He found it in you. That's not something I can ignore." "And what about you?" she asked before she could stop herself. The question sat there open and raw. Silas didn't flinch. I think I'm starting to need it too. Miss Hattie stepped back into the room with a tray of tea, mercifully interrupting whatever moment was about to unfold. She set the tray down on a small table, nodding toward the open doors leading to the back veranda. Y'all go on out. It's warm and breezy. The baby likes the wind in his hair. They followed her lead. The veranda overlooked a rolling lawn with trees just starting to turn gold. Rachel sat on a cushioned wicker chair with Julian in her arms, while Silas poured tea and sat across from her. There was something about the afternoon light that softened everything, the edges of their grief, the distance between them, even the space where silence lived. He was born early, Silas said, nodding toward Julian. 7 weeks. Leona was fine one moment, and then she wasn't. The doctor said her heart gave out from a rare postpartum condition. I had no idea it existed. Rachel swallowed hard. Neither did I. Until I watched it happen to a patient. Once. It doesn't leave you, does it, the way it unfolds so fast? No, it stays. He shifted slightly, watching her. That's what it's been like since, like something is always missing, even in joy. Rachel nodded slowly. Grief doesn't shrink. You just grow around it. They sat in silence, sipping tea, Julian dozing against her chest. After a while, Silas stood. I want to show you something. He led her down a hallway toward a small room at the back of the house. Rachel followed, curious, still holding Julian. He opened the door and stepped aside. Inside was a nursery, but not just any nursery. It looked almost exactly like the one she'd built for Emily. The soft green walls, the vintage mobile of stars, the white wooden rocker. Rachel stopped breathing for a second. Silas spoke behind her voice, low. I didn't know. Miss Hattie decorated it while I was buried in meetings and trying to survive. But when I saw it, I felt like I'd been here before. Rachel ran her hand over the edge of the crib. Are you trying to make this harder? She whispered. No, he said. I just want you to know this house isn't just mine. It's full of people who've loved and lost and still made space for something new. Julian stirred in her arms. She looked down at him, then back at Silas. What do you want from me, Silas? He stepped closer, not touching her, but close enough for her to feel his warmth. Honesty. I don't know where this is going, but I know that every time I see you, something in me settles. And when Julian is near you, he becomes calm. Safe. Rachel's throat tightened. I can't be someone's replacement. You're not. I can't survive another loss. I'm not asking you to give anything you don't choose. But I am asking you not to walk away just yet. She looked around the room again, every inch filled with echoes of what she'd once dreamed of. And maybe a chance at dreaming again. The next time Rachel visited the Moreau estate, she didn't knock. She stepped through the open side gate past the stone path that wound under a canopy of crepe myrtles and followed the now familiar hum of laughter toward the back garden. The air was heavy with magnolia and late summer warmth. She could hear Julian before she saw him, babbling sounds and tiny giggles that filled something in her chest she hadn't even realized was empty. He was on a picnic blanket, legs kicking, cheeks flushed, while Miss Hattie sat beside him with a basket of soft toys and a jar of mashed peaches. Rachel slowed, watching the scene like someone pressing their face to the glass of a life they never thought they'd see again. Miss Hattie looked up and grinned. Well, if it isn't sunshine in human form. Rachel flushed. He sounds happy. He is, especially on Wednesdays. I wonder why. Hattie winked and lifted a spoonful of peaches to Julian's mouth. Rachel knelt next to them, smoothing the baby's hair gently. He turned toward her instantly, eyes lighting up in that way that always made her breath catch. I brought the oat-teething biscuits, Rachel said, reaching into her tote. The ones you said he liked. Hattie nodded approvingly. Good. He'll chew on those instead of my rings. Rachel smiled, but her heart wasn't entirely steady. This being here, knowing when Julian napped, knowing his favorite toy, the exact pitch of his sleepy cry was becoming familiar. Too familiar. She didn't belong here. Not really. She was a visitor, not a mother. Still, she stayed. Silas is in the vineyard, Hattie said casually, as if that weren't the most ridiculous sentence ever spoken. Checking on the last of the summer yield. He asked me to send you back when you got here. Rachel hesitated. He said that she asked. Hattie arched a brow. You're the only person who doesn't seem to know how much that man wants you to stay. Rachel's throat tightened. She picked up Julian and kissed his head. I'll be back in a bit, she whispered. The vineyard stretched behind the house, rows of vines heavy with fruit, the leaves just beginning to blush toward gold. Rachel followed the gravel path until she saw him. Silas standing beneath a trellis, clipboard in hand, sleeves rolled, sun caught in the curve of his jaw. She paused, watched him move through the vines' methodical quiet, like he belonged to the land itself. Hey, she called softly. He turned and smiled. It was a rare thing from him, that smile, real relaxed, almost boyish. It did something to her chest, something she wasn't prepared for. You came, he said. You invited me. I always would. She walked slowly toward him, trailing her fingers along the vines. This place, it's beautiful. It's home, he said, voice lower now, but it hasn't felt like it until recently. Rachel stopped beside him. Because of Julian, because of you. Her breath caught. Silas watched her. Rachel, I know you're careful. I know you're still healing. But I don't want to tiptoe around this like we're pretending it's something else. She looked down, heart pounding. It's not that simple. Maybe not. But it is honest. I don't know how to be someone's anything right now, she whispered. Some days I still wake up angry. Others I forget how to breathe. I don't need perfect, Silas said. I need real. Rachel's eyes met his. What if I'm still too broken? Then we'll break together. And rebuild. It was too much. And not enough, and exactly what she'd needed to hear. She turned away, unsure how to hold all of it, the weight of her grief, the pull of him, the ache of wanting something she wasn't sure she was allowed to want. I'm scared, she admitted. So am I. She looked back at him. I don't want to be a chapter in your healing, he said quietly. I want to be the part where the book starts over. Rachel stepped closer, voice trembling. If I do this, if I let myself fall into this, you need to understand I can't lose someone again. Silas didn't reach for her. He didn't need to. I've already lost too much, he said. That's why I won't let go. Their eyes locked. Then softly, carefully, she leaned forward, resting her forehead against his chest. Silas stood still, letting her have that moment, letting her shake, letting her breathe. When she finally pulled back, she didn't speak. She didn't have to. They walked back toward the house in silence. When they reached the garden, Julian squealed from the blanket and reached for her. Rachel scooped him up without thinking, and the baby nestled into her shoulder like he belonged there. And maybe he did. Miss Hattie handed her a glass of iced tea, her eyes warm and sharp. There's a porch swing around the side of the house, good for quiet thinking and long talks. Rachel nodded, but she didn't go right away. She stood there, baby on her hip, sun in her eyes, Silas at her side. Somewhere between memory and possibility. And for the first time in months, she didn't feel like a ghost in her own story. She felt alive and terrified and exactly where she was meant to be. Rain started just after dusk. Not a storm, Not even a real shower, just that soft southern kind of rain, warm and slow, like the sky was exhaling. Rachel sat on the porch swing with Julian in her arms, wrapped in a light blanket, his breath even and steady against her collarbone. The swing creaked gently beneath them, the sound somehow comforting like an old lullaby. Silas hadn't said much after dinner. They'd sat with Miss Hattie and Byron, her grumpy but kind partner of 30 years, eating lemon-thyme chicken and cornbread from mismatched plates, while cicadas hummed outside the screened-in windows. It had been easy. Domestic. Maybe too easy. That scared her more than anything. Now, as the sun melted behind the hills and the world turned lavender gray, Rachel traced lazy circles on Julian's back and listened to the quiet thrum of the rain on the roof. She felt Silas before she heard him. His steps were always unhurried, deliberate, like he didn't want to startle the earth beneath him. He appeared in the doorway of the porch, leaning one shoulder against the frame. His shirt sleeves were rolled again, collar-open hair tousled in a way that said he'd been fighting thoughts. "Can I join you?" he asked softly. She nodded without turning her head. He just went down. Silas walked over and sat beside her close enough that their knees brushed. He looked at Julian with something between awe and fear, still unsure how to carry the weight of fatherhood, but unwilling to set it down. "I haven't asked you something," he said after a long moment. Rachel glanced over. "That's not true. You've asked a lot. Not this." He waited until she met his eyes. "Do you regret it? What you did on the plane?" The question landed like a stone in still water. Rachel held his gaze, surprised by the sudden sharpness of her own breath. "No," she said, "not for a second." Silas looked away out toward the trees, shimmering in the fading light. "Sometimes I wonder what kind of man I would have been if Leona had lived." Rachel swallowed. "That's not a fair question. Maybe not. But I ask it anyway. Would I have held my son this tightly? Would I have noticed the details, his eyelashes, the way he curls his toes when he's dreaming? Or would I have just assumed she would do all that?" Rachel didn't speak. She let him sit in the honesty of it. "I thought I was prepared," he went on. "I thought money, legacy, resources, they'd insulate me from tragedy. But when she died, I realized how unprepared I actually was for life." "You can't plan your way through heartbreak," Rachel whispered. Silas looked down at his hands, then at her. "You're not afraid to say things most people won't." She smiled faintly. "I think you already know what you need to hear. You just want someone to say it out loud first." Silas chuckled under his breath. "You always do that. What, find the thread under everything? Pull it loose until the truth shows up." She shifted Julian slightly. The baby whimpered once, then settled. "I used to think love was something I'd already used up," she said, "like I'd given the best of myself to Emily, that there was nothing left. But I was wrong." Silas turned to her fully. "You love him, don't you?" Her eyes flicked to Julian. "I didn't mean to. I told myself I was just helping, that it was temporary, but every time I hold him something quiets inside me. Like a part of me I thought was dead is waking up again." Silas didn't answer right away. He reached out slowly, brushing a raindrop from her cheek. She hadn't even realized it had landed there. "I don't know how to do this," he said, voice low and rough. "Not just with him, with you." Rachel's breath caught. "I want to," he said, "but I'm scared I'll ask too much, move too fast, that I'll ruin something I don't fully understand yet." "I'm not asking for promises," Rachel said. "I'm asking for honesty. If we're going to keep circling this thing between us, we need to name it." He nodded once. "Okay." Silence stretched again, thick, not empty. Then he stood and reached out his hand. "Come with me." Rachel looked up, confused. "Where just come?" Carefully, she handed Julian over to Miss Hattie, who had appeared like magic in the doorway. "I'll keep him on my lap," Hattie said gently. "Y'all go." Rachel followed Silas down the porch steps and through the garden, the gravel cool beneath her bare feet, the rain now only a whisper. He led her to a small greenhouse behind the vineyard, its windows fogged with warmth and light inside. When he opened the door, Rachel gasped. It was filled with night-blooming jasmine. Vines trailed the walls, delicate white flowers opening slowly in the dimness, releasing a scent so pure it made her dizzy. Silas lit a single lantern hanging in the center, its glow dancing against the glass. "I come here when I can't sleep," he said, "when the house feels too heavy." Rachel stepped inside slowly. "It smells like memory." "It smells like her," he said. Leona planted the first vine. She said grief needed a place to bloom. Rachel turned to him, eyes shining. "She'd like you," he added. "She wouldn't want me to be alone forever." Rachel moved to the center of the room, the air thick with scent and emotion. Neither would Emily. Silas stepped closer, close enough to feel the pull of her breath. "I don't want to forget them," he said. "You won't. I don't want this to be some escape. It's not." They stood there, surrounded by flowers that only bloomed after dark. Finally, Silas spoke again. "Then tell me what this is." Rachel looked up at him. "A beginning." He reached for her hand, just one, and she let him take it. No more circling. No more pretending. Just the slow, terrifying, beautiful choice to begin. The following morning, Rachel stood in front of the mirror, brushing her hair with a kind of stillness she hadn't known in months. The early sun filtered through the sheer curtains of the cottage bedroom, casting light across her collarbone, the curve of her shoulder. Everything about the room felt unfamiliar and sacred, like her skin had finally remembered what peace could feel like. But peace wasn't the same as certainty. Her phone buzzed on the nightstand. A text from Silas. "Breakfast at the house. Miss Hattie's making biscuits. Julian's already asking for you." Rachel smiled before she could stop herself, then set the phone down and took a deep breath. This was real. It was happening, and it terrified her. Still, she packed her bag, slipped on her sandals, and drove through winding roads kissed by morning fog. When she arrived at the estate, Byron was out front pruning roses, humming off-key, and completely unapologetic about it. "You're late," he grinned without looking up. He's been pacing like a teenager. Rachel laughed softly. "Good morning to you, too." Inside, the kitchen smelled like butter and rosemary. Miss Hattie was at the stove apron, flour dusted, her eyes cutting toward Rachel with warmth and mischief. "I set aside the end pieces of the biscuits. I know you're one of those edge people." Rachel grinned and leaned in to kiss her cheek. "You're too good to me, and you're too good for him? But here we are." Silas appeared then, barefoot, and rumpled in a way that was dangerous. Dangerous because it wasn't intentional. He looked like he'd woken up thinking about her, and she wasn't ready for how much that look unraveled her. Julian was on his hip, babbling at his stuffed owl. "Hi there," Silas said softly, like it was a sacred word only meant for her. Rachel crossed the kitchen and gently took Julian, who reached for her like he hadn't seen her in a week. "Hi, sweet boy. Did you miss me?" The baby responded with a squeal and immediate snuggle under her chin. Silas leaned against the counter, watching. He didn't settle until I played the song you hummed on the plane. Rachel stilled. "I didn't even realize I was humming." He did. They sat at the long wooden table, the four of them, Miss Hattie, Byron, Silas, Rachel, and Julian on her lap, trying to gum a piece of biscuit with intense concentration. It felt domestic. Easy. Too easy. Which is why when Miss Hattie glanced over her glasses and said, Silas, you told her yet, the air in Rachel's chest pulled tight. He looked up, surprised, then hesitant. Told me what Silas cleared his throat. There's a fundraiser this Friday for the Land Conservancy at the Biltmore. Kind of a big deal. Rachel raised an eyebrow. The Biltmore kind of big deal. He nodded. Black tie auction, all of it. And you want me to go? I'd like you to. But only if you want to. Miss Hattie snorted. You'd think he was asking her to walk into a war zone. Rachel set Julian on her hip and stood to carry him to the sink, rinsing his sticky fingers. She didn't answer right away. Silas followed. I don't want to push, he said gently. I just thought, maybe it's time people saw you. With me. Rachel turned, drying her hands. What does that mean with you? He swallowed. That we're something. That you're introducing me as the woman who breastfed your son on a plane. He winced. I mean, no, not exactly. She looked at him, her voice soft but firm. You live in a world of polished legacy and old money. I live in rented cottages and scrub hospital floors. What happens when they ask who I am, Silas? What do you tell them? He stepped closer. I'll tell them the truth. That you're the most grounded person I've ever met. That you saved my son. And that I've fallen for you in a way I don't fully know how to explain. The room felt like it tilted. Rachel took a half step back. Don't say that. Why not? Because if you say it now and something breaks, I won't be able to put myself back together again. Silas didn't argue. He didn't press. He just nodded, eyes heavy with understanding. I'll still leave your name at the door, in case you change your mind. She stood there long after he'd gone back to the table, holding on to the edge of the counter, like it was the only thing keeping her upright. That night she drove aimlessly through Asheville, watching the way the city held light differently in the dark. She ended up in front of the hospital where she used to work. Parked, watched the emergency room doors slide open and closed. Her reflection stared back from the windshield. Was she still that version of herself? The nurse who knew what every beep on every machine meant. The woman who folded baby blankets in the NICU with hands that were never quite steady, but always sure. Or was she someone new? The next morning she opened a long, forgotten garment bag tucked in the back of her closet. Inside was a dress she hadn't worn since her best friend's wedding, soft slate blue silk, with an open back and delicate sleeves. It still fit. Barely. On Friday evening, she stood in front of the mirror again this time, with her hair swept up her mother's pearl earrings in place and her palms pressed flat against her stomach to stop the fluttering. When she arrived at the Biltmore, the valet opened her door and blinked. Miss... He started hesitating as if unsure how to place her. Rachel smiled. I'm expected. Inside the ballroom glowed with chandeliers and soft jazz. Servers floated with trays of champagne, and just beyond the fountain centerpiece stood Silas in a dark suit that looked like it had been made for his shoulders, scanning the room with something just shy of hope in his eyes. When he saw her, he froze, then smiled, slow and stunned, like he couldn't quite believe she was real. She walked to him without hesitating. He offered his arm. She took it. Neither of them said a word. But when the crowd parted, when the whispers began, when eyes turned and brows lifted with curiosity, Rachel stood tall. Because in that moment she wasn't just the woman who'd fed a stranger's baby. She was the woman he'd chosen to stand beside. And the one who'd finally chosen herself. Rachel hadn't expected the hush. When she stepped onto Silas's arm and entered the grand ballroom, the air shifted. It wasn't harsh, no whispers with teeth, but it was thick with curiosity. Polished people in silk and satin turned slightly, their conversations pausing mid-sentence eyes, lingering too long. She kept her chin high. Silas leaned down, voice low. You okay? I'm fine, she lied softly. The truth was, every light in the room felt like a spotlight, every glance like a test. But her fingers curled tighter around his arm. She'd walked through worse hospital hallways, lit by grief rooms, filled with silence after the machines stopped. This was just champagne and judgment. She could survive that. They moved slowly through the crowd, Silas offering a polite smile here, a handshake there. Several older men greeted him with deference, and women draped in diamonds studied Rachel with interest, too keen to be subtle. Is that her? She's the one, right? The baby woman Rachel caught snippets, and her stomach turned, but she said nothing. Then came Lillian. The woman moved like a breeze wrapped in pearls, tall, elegant, and clearly used to being the center of any room she entered. She wore a deep green gown that made her look like old money personified. Silas, she drawled, stepping between him and the next conversation. Lillian Silas set a tight smile. It's been a while. Not long enough, she replied, though the smile never left her lips. Her eyes turned to Rachel, cool, assessing, familiar in that southern kind of way that wrapped cruelty in charm. And this must be the reason people can't stop talking. Rachel extended a hand, polite. I'm Rachel. Oh, we all know who you are, Lillian said sweetly. You're practically famous. The woman who did what no nanny nurse or socialite could calm the Moreau air mid-flight. Remarkable. Rachel's hand dropped slowly. I didn't know I was a headline. Oh, darling, Lillian laughed. You're a whole chapter. Silas stepped in. Lillian, that's enough. Rachel placed a hand lightly on his arm. No, it's okay. She met Lillian's gaze, even and calm. If a moment of compassion is what made people look twice, I'll live with that. Lillian blinked. Rachel continued. It's not glamorous, but it was human, and sometimes that's louder than money. For a breath, the room tilted. Then Lillian smiled brittle at the edges. Well said. She turned on a heel, disappearing into the crowd like mist. Silas looked at Rachel. Are you all right? I've had worse in parent-teacher meetings. He chuckled, the tension leaving his shoulders. You didn't have to handle her. Yes, I did. If I'm going to walk beside you, I need to know I can stand in this world too. He looked at her with something like awe. You don't just stand in it, Rachel. You own it. The rest of the evening blurred. Speeches, laughter, champagne clinking against crystal. But through it all, Rachel felt something unspoken blooming between them, something stronger than attraction, deeper than curiosity. Connection. Undeniable and slow-burning. After the auction, Silas led her to a quiet balcony overlooking the gardens. The breeze was cool, and the city lights glittered in the distance. He rested his hands on the railing beside her, close but not touching. You really showed up tonight, he said. I had to, for myself more than anything. I saw the way they looked at you. I hated it. Rachel turned to him. Don't. Let them look. Let them wonder. He exhaled slowly, gaze never leaving hers. This isn't just a moment anymore, is it? She shook her head. It hasn't been for a while. He took a step closer, voice lower. What do you need from me, Rachel? The question was real, heavy, not a line, not a promise. She thought for a moment, then looked up at him. I need to be seen, not for what I did, but for who I am. You are, he said instantly, every part of you. Silence pressed in. Then she said, barely above a whisper, I'm scared to need someone again. He didn't move away. So am I. Rachel reached for his hand. But I think I already do. He turned his palm to hold hers. Then let's be scared together. They stayed like that, no kiss, no crescendo, just the quiet gravity of two people realizing they were already falling. And neither of them wanted to stop. Inside, the music swelled again, But outside on that balcony, the world held still. And in that stillness, something sacred was forming. Something fragile, yes, but fiercely real. The vineyard was quiet that Sunday morning, blanketed in the kind of stillness that felt earned. Dew clung to every leaf, and the sky held that soft hush before full sun. Rachel stood barefoot on the back porch of Silas's house, a cup of coffee in her hands. Julian nestled in a wrap against her chest. He was heavier now. She hadn't noticed it until just then. His cheeks fuller, his fingers fatter. He grunted softly in his sleep, adjusting his head beneath her chin, and Rachel blinked hard against the sudden welling in her throat. "How does it feel?" came a voice from behind. She turned. Silas stood there dressed simply in jeans and a white t-shirt, hair damp from a shower. He looked different in the daylight. Younger, almost like the weight he wore at night hadn't found him yet this morning. She smiled softly. Heavy, but in a good way. He stepped beside her and looked out across the rows of vines. "You know, I think he knows." Rachel glanced at him. "Knows what? That you're safe, that you're something steady." Her voice dropped. "I don't feel steady." He looked at her brow furrowed. "You've become the only constant in his little world. That counts for something." They stood in silence for a moment. Then Rachel set her mug down, carefully adjusted Julian in the wrap, and turned to face him. "Can I ask you something personal?" Silas nodded, no hesitation. "What happened after Leona passed? I mean, how did you go from that to this?" She gestured gently towards the house. The land, the life he'd built. "It feels like you skipped the part where everything falls apart." He breathed in slowly, folding his arms. "I didn't skip it. I just didn't let anyone see it." Rachel nodded. "That tracks. I had help, Miss Hattie mostly, and Pastor Clay, Byron. But grief like that, it doesn't just go away. It coats everything, makes joy feel like betrayal." Rachel's eyes misted. She looked down at Julian. "I used to lie awake wondering if it was okay to smile," she whispered. "Like if I did, I was letting go of Emily too soon." Silas stepped closer. "You never let go," he said. "You just learn how to carry them without breaking." She met his eyes. "And do you still carry her every day? But now, it's lighter. Because of him," he nodded toward Julian, "and because of you." Rachel opened her mouth to respond, but just then, the screen door creaked behind them. "Miss Hattie." "Forgive the interruption," she said gently, "but someone's at the front gate. Says her name's Dana. Claims to know you, Rachel." Rachel's stomach dropped. Her voice caught. "Dana wearing hospital scrubs. Said she worked with you." Rachel stepped back, her heartbeat picking up. "She's not supposed to be here." Silas's brows furrowed. "Do you want me to—" "No," Rachel said quickly, then softened. "No, I'll talk to her." She passed Julian to Miss Hattie, her hands trembling slightly, and walked around the side of the house to the gate. Dana was waiting, ponytail pulled tight, same no-nonsense expression she'd worn every shift. "I must be dreaming," she muttered. "Is this where you've been hiding?" Rachel opened the gate. "I wasn't hiding." Dana looked her over. "Well, you look better than you did 6 months ago. I was half convinced you'd left the planet." Rachel forced a smile. "Why are you here?" Dana softened just a hair. "Dr. Patel's retiring. He asked about you." "Everyone has. We didn't know if we should worry or leave you alone. I figured maybe it was time to stop guessing." Rachel looked back towards the house. "I didn't mean to vanish," "I know," Dana said. "But Rachel, you didn't just vanish from work. You vanished from your life." There was no accusation in her tone, just a kind of concern that pressed too close to the truth. Rachel folded her arms across her chest. "I couldn't breathe in that building anymore. Every room reminded me of Emily, every beep, every lullaby. It was like walking through ghosts." Dana exhaled. You should have said something. We would have understood. I didn't want to be pitied. We wouldn't have pitied you, Dana said. We would have grieved with you. That landed hard. Rachel looked away, eyes wet. Dana stepped closer, voice soft. I'm not here to drag you back, Rachel. I'm here to tell you that we miss you. And if you want to come back, just one shift a week, just to ease in the doors still open. Rachel swallowed. I don't know if I'm ready. You don't have to be ready, Dana said. You just have to be willing. Rachel nodded slowly. I'll think about it. Dana smiled finally. That's all I came for. As she turned to leave, Rachel called out Dana. She turned back. Thank you. Dana gave a small wave and disappeared down the path. Rachel walked back to the porch, heart pounding in a way she couldn't quite name. Silas was waiting, Julian back in his arms, drowsy again. You okay? He asked. Rachel nodded, but her eyes were distant. She offered me my job back. He blinked. That's good, right? I'm not sure. Why not? Rachel stepped closer, took Julian again, kissed his forehead. Because I'm not the same person who left. Silas touched her shoulder steady. Then maybe it's not about going back. Maybe it's about choosing where you want to go next. She met his eyes. I don't want to lose myself in someone else's life again, she said. I've done that before. It cost me more than I knew I had. You won't, he said. Not this time. Rachel looked out across the vineyard, not back, forward. And for the first time since her life had shattered, she realized she had a choice again. And that was everything. The vineyard looked different under autumn light. It wasn't quite fall yet, not really, but the air carried a crispness that hinted at change. Rachel stood at the edge of the rows, watching the workers clip bunches of grapes into wooden bins. Julian sat on her hip, grabbing at the leaves, squealing each time she dipped toward the vines to distract him. His laughter was a sound she hadn't known she needed. Behind her, Silas approached slowly, his steps almost reverent. He'd been giving her space since Dana's visit, careful but never distant, present without pressure. That in itself was a kind of love. You've been quiet, he said. I've been thinking. He stepped beside her. That sounds dangerous. She smiled but didn't laugh. I went back to the hospital yesterday. Silas blinked. You didn't say. I didn't know if I'd go in, she said. But I parked. I walked the halls. I watched a new nurse rock a baby to sleep in the waiting room. I just stood there. Did it hurt, Rachel? Looked at him, her eyes soft. It didn't crush me. That's something, right? He nodded slowly. That's more than something. Julian started fussing, and Rachel shifted him to the other side, brushing her cheek against his. I'm still not sure if I'm going back, but I think I'm ready to stop running from it. Silas didn't say anything right away. Then, you're brave. No, she whispered. I'm tired of being afraid. They walked a little farther together, Julian babbling nonsense between them. The rhythm of the vineyard had become familiar harvesters calling to one another, shears, clipping through vine bins, filling with promise. At the edge of the rows, Silas paused. There's something I want to show you. She raised a brow. It's not jasmine this time, he said, and smiled. But it means something to me. He led her down a narrow path behind the barn to a small grove of trees. Tucked into the trees was a stone bench, worn and weathered, with a plaque embedded at its base. Rachel bent to read it. For the ones who left too soon, and the ones who stayed behind. She sat slowly, Julian in her arms, quiet now. I had it made after Leona passed, Silas said, sitting beside her. I couldn't find words that felt big enough to hold the loss, so I used the ones that felt honest. Rachel looked at him. This is beautiful. It's also where I go when I can't breathe, when it all feels too big." She nodded slowly. "I have a spot like that. A park bench outside the children's wing. I used to sit there on my lunch breaks and count how many parents walked in with balloons, and how many walked out empty-handed." Silas's face tightened. "I stopped counting," she added. "One day I realized it wasn't helping anyone, least of all me." They sat there a while longer, the wind brushing through the trees like a lullaby. Julian had fallen asleep against her chest again, his tiny fist curled against her collarbone. "I think I love him," she said suddenly. Silas turned to her, startled. "I mean, I know I love him. I think I've loved him since the plane. But it's different now. It's not just instinct. It's real." Silas's voice was thick. "He knows. You can tell in the way he looks at you. You're home to him." Rachel closed her eyes. "I don't know what that makes me," she said quietly. "Not his mother. Not really." "No," Silas said, "but you're something he'll never be able to put into words. And that might matter even more." They were quiet again. Then Rachel stood careful not to wake Julian. "I should get him back to the cottage," she said. "He's overdue for a nap." Silas walked her back, his hands in his pockets. The air had shifted slightly, the golden hue of late afternoon settling over the vineyard like a quilt. As they reached her front steps, Rachel turned to him. "Will you stay for dinner?" He hesitated, then nodded. "I'd like that." She smiled. "Good, because I made far too much soup." He laughed. "Are you trying to bribe me with food? It works, doesn't it?" Inside, she laid Julian in the crib, tucked into the corner of her room. Silas hovered in the doorway, watching her with a kind of tenderness that made her chest ache. They moved through the evening like they'd done it 100 times before, chopping vegetables side by side, passing bowls, wiping the counter with one shared cloth. Silas lit candles without being asked. Rachel poured wine without thinking twice. Dinner passed with stories and soft laughter. But as the last spoonfuls were scraped from the bowls, the quiet came back. Rachel looked up from her glass. "What happens now?" Silas leaned back in his chair, his gaze steady. "I don't know. That's not like you." He smiled faintly. "I've spent a long time trying to control everything, every outcome, every risk. But with you, I don't want control. I just want truth." Rachel's throat tightened. "What if the truth is that I'm scared?" "Then let's be scared together," he said, echoing their moment on the balcony. She looked at him for a long time, then stood and crossed to his side of the table. Without a word, she took his hand, pulled him up, and led him to the porch. The night air was cooler now, stars peeking through thin clouds. They stood there shoulder to shoulder, the world quiet around them. Rachel leaned her head against his arm. "I'm not promising forever," she whispered. "I'm not asking for it," he replied. "Just tonight. Just this." And for the first time since her life cracked open, Rachel didn't feel broken. She felt whole. Not because someone had fixed her, but because someone had chosen to stand beside her while she found her own way back. The first rain of the season arrived with no warning, soft at first, then steady, coating the hills in a silver shimmer that blurred the trees and soaked the vineyard in silence. Rachel stood by the kitchen window, stirring a pot of soup with one hand while balancing Julian on her hip. He was restless today, clinging tighter than usual, his whimpers curling beneath her collarbone. "Bad weather does that to people," Miss Hattie had once said. "Stirs up things we don't know we're carrying." She hummed softly, hoping the rhythm of her voice would ease him. He didn't sleep well last night. Neither did she. Something had been off since the moment she woke up. She turned down the stove, pressed a kiss to Julian's forehead, and whispered, "We're okay, baby. We're okay." But even as she said it, She heard the crunch of tires on wet gravel. A car. Rachel glanced out the window and saw a sleek black sedan pulling up to the house. Not Silas's truck, not Byron's Jeep, someone else. She shifted Julian against her chest and stepped onto the porch just as the driver's door opened. A woman stepped out. Mid-50s, maybe older. Impeccably dressed. Pale pink coat heels that didn't belong anywhere near farmland, and an umbrella she didn't open. She moved with the practiced grace of someone used to owning the space she stood in. Rachel's breath caught. She didn't need an introduction. Leona's mother. The resemblance was too sharp to miss. The woman's eyes scanned the porch, then settled on Rachel. On Julian. She walked forward slow but certain. Rachel stood her ground. "Can I help you?" The woman's voice was smooth, polished. "You're Rachel." It wasn't a question. "I am. And that's Julian." Rachel tightened her arms around him. "Yes, I'm Celeste." Rachel nodded, unsure what else to say. "I'd like to come inside." Rachel hesitated. "Silas isn't here. I didn't come to see him." The rain picked up. Rachel opened the door. Celeste stepped in her eyes, flicking over the modest furniture, the scattered toys, the stack of folded laundry on the arm of the couch. She said nothing, but the silence was loud. Rachel gently lowered Julian into his bassinet, then turned to face her. "I wasn't expecting company," she said quietly. "I'm not here to accuse," Celeste replied, "or to interfere. I needed to see who you are, what kind of woman captures my son-in-law's heart and helps raise my grandson." Rachel blinked. Celeste's eyes softened. "You're not what I imagined." Rachel swallowed. "Is that a good thing? I think so." There was a beat of quiet before Celeste walked to the window, peering out at the mist over the hills. Leona loved this place, she said. She thought it was wild and romantic and much too dirty. She always packed 3 pairs of shoes just in case. Rachel offered a soft smile. "Julian's already lost 2 to the mud." Celeste turned back. Her voice changed. "You love him, don't you?" "I do, even though he's not yours." Rachel stepped closer. "He is, though. Not by blood, but by heart. By choice." Celeste's eyes glistened. "That's the part I didn't expect to believe. But now that I see it, I do." Rachel nodded, feeling something shift. "I won't pretend it's been easy," she said. "There were days I couldn't breathe. Nights I couldn't sleep because he cried, and I didn't know why. But I stayed. I keep staying. Because that little boy, he's teaching me how to love again." Celeste walked toward Julian's bassinet, kneeling beside it. Her hand hovered over his blanket, but didn't touch. "He looks just like her when he sleeps," she whispered. Rachel watched her, unsure whether to speak. Then Celeste stood smoothing her coat. "I won't stay," she said. "I just needed to know he was safe. That you were safe." Rachel nodded. "We are." Celeste moved to the door, pausing. "You may not be his mother by birth," she said softly, "but you're something I never thought he'd get again, a woman who loves him like her own. That matters." Rachel's throat tightened. "Thank you for coming." Celeste opened the door, then glanced back one last time. "Tell Silas I said hello. And tell him he did right by her." Then she stepped out into the rain, leaving behind the echo of something Rachel hadn't expected. Blessing, not approval, not permission. Something deeper. And as the rain rolled harder across the vineyard, Rachel stood in the doorway, one hand pressed to her heart, as if to hold all of it still. Rachel sat on the edge of the bed, long after Julian had fallen asleep, her hand resting gently on his back, as he breathed in tiny, even rhythms. The rain had passed, but her thoughts hadn't quieted. Celeste's visit stirred something deeper than she expected acceptance. Yes, but also something more fragile. permission. A door quietly opening where she hadn't even known one existed. She didn't hear Silas come in until the floor creaked behind her. "Miss Hattie told me," he said softly. "Your visitor." Rachel didn't look up right away. She was kind, not warm, but kind. "That's more than I expected." She turned then. "I think it took everything in her to come here." "But she did." Silas leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, expression unreadable. "She didn't come to me. She didn't need to," Rachel said. "She needed to see Julian and me." A long silence stretched between them. Then Silas stepped inside, took a seat beside her on the bed. His voice was quiet. "Did she say anything about me?" Rachel considered lying, but something told her not to. "She said you did right by Leona." Silas exhaled hard, like he'd been holding that breath for a year. "I didn't think I ever would," he whispered. "Not after everything." "You loved her," Rachel said. "That counts. I didn't protect her the way I should have," he muttered. Rachel turned to face him fully. "Silas, grief twists memory. Makes you think you should have been done more. But love isn't measured in what you missed. It's measured in what you gave while you still could." He looked at her, then really looked, like she'd just spoken the words he hadn't let himself believe. Rachel reached out, resting a hand over his. "You've carried guilt for so long? Maybe it's time to carry something else." He didn't speak, but his fingers tightened around hers. Outside, the moon slipped through thinning clouds, casting pale light across the floor. "I've been thinking," Rachel said quietly. "About what comes next." Silas straightened, cautious. "For you, for all of us." She stood and paced slowly barefoot across the cool floor. Julian's starting to recognize faces. He lights up when Byron sings that ridiculous cowboy lullaby, and he cries when I leave the room. He's attaching, and that means I need to start deciding what this looks like for real. Silas rose too, keeping his distance. "I don't want to assume," he said. "You've never owed me anything." Rachel turned, meeting his eyes. "But I want to give you something. I want to choose this, not just fall into it." His breath caught. "I want Julian to grow up with clarity," she continued, "not confusion. I want him to know who he belongs to, and I want to make sure I'm not running from my past anymore. I'm walking into my future." Silas took a step toward her. "What does that future look like?" Rachel hesitated, then offered a tentative smile. "That depends." "Are you in it?" Silas didn't answer with words. He simply crossed the space between them, took her hands, and rested his forehead against hers. "You're all I see," he murmured. They stood that way, held together by silence, until Julian stirred behind them. Rachel turned, gently glancing back at the crib. "He's waking up more often now," she said. "Dreams, maybe. Or growing pains." Silas watched her lift Julian, soothe him without thought. "He's safe with you." Rachel looked over her shoulder. "He's safe with us." That word "us" settled into the room like a promise. They didn't need to speak it aloud, not yet. But the weight of it, the truth of it, filled every corner of the quiet night. The morning sun filtered through the gauzy curtains, spilling soft gold across the kitchen floor. Rachel stood barefoot in front of the stove, stirring scrambled eggs one-handed, while Julian clung to her leg, babbling with sleepy delight. She was learning how to move like this, improvising life with a toddler, gracefully ungraceful. Miss Hattie had just stepped in from the back porch carrying a basket of fresh herbs and wiping her hands on her apron. "Boy's growing faster than corn in July," she said with a grin. "You blink and he'll be asking for the keys to the truck." Rachel laughed, glancing down. He already thinks he's in charge. Julian squealed, as if in agreement, then tottered toward the dog bowl in the corner. Rachel swooped down just in time to intercept him. Miss Hattie sat at the kitchen table pulling sprigs of rosemary from their stems. Her gaze settled on Rachel, thoughtful now. "You ever think about what it means staying? Here, with Silas." Rachel froze for half a beat, her fingers still wrapped around Julian's waist. "Every day. And I want to," she said. "I just don't want to lose myself in the process." Miss Hattie nodded, slow and knowing. "You won't, not if you remember who you were before all this, and let her walk beside who you're becoming." Rachel opened her mouth to respond when the front door creaked open. Silas stepped in, jacket dusted with vineyard soil cheeks, wind-kissed from the morning chill. He gave a short wave. "Mind if I steal you both for a bit?" Rachel arched a brow. "Both?" He walked over, gently lifted Julian into his arms. "We're headed to town. There's something I want to show you." Miss Hattie looked up from her herbs, smirking. "Lord help her, he's about to get sentimental." Rachel grabbed her coat. "He's been sentimental." Silas grinned as he buckled Julian into the car seat, then helped Rachel into the passenger side. The drive into town was quiet, filled with small sounds. Julian cooing in the back seat, the soft hum of tires on gravel, the occasional rustle of wind through the pines. They pulled up to an old storefront near the square, tucked between the barber and a second-hand bookstore. It had a faded awning, a door with peeling paint, and windows covered in newspaper. Rachel stepped out, slowly, confused. "What is this place?" Silas looked a little nervous now, rubbing the back of his neck. "Used to be a bakery. Been empty for a while. But the bones are good." She turned to him. And I bought it," he said, exhaling. "I wasn't sure when or how to tell you, but I kept thinking about all the ways you'd lit up every time you cooked or helped Miss Hattie with a recipe, or found new things for Julian to try." Rachel blinked. "You bought a bakery, I bought a future," he said simply. "Not just mine. Maybe yours, if you want it." He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a folded sheet of paper. A rough sketch of the inside kitchen layout, counter space, even a play corner drawn in pencil. "I want this to be more than just land and vines," he said. "I want this place to have heart. You've brought more of that into my life than I knew was missing." Rachel stared at the drawing, her breath catching. "I don't want you to feel like you're trapped here," Silas added quickly. "I just thought maybe we could build something. Together." Julian clapped from the car seat, completely unaware that the air had just thickened with something deeper than dreams. Rachel looked at Silas, eyes shining. "You're serious?" He nodded. "Completely." A smile tugged at her lips. "You might be crazier than I thought." He chuckled. "Probably." She turned back to the storefront, stepping closer. Behind the newspaper, she could just make out old shelves and the ghost of lettering on the wall that read, "Sweet Magnolias." "I used to dream about a place like this," she said softly. "Before Emily. Before everything fell apart." He came beside her. "Maybe it's time to dream again." She didn't answer right away. She just stood there, hand pressed to the glass, Julian giggling in the distance, the past at her back, and something daring just ahead. And then she whispered, "Okay." Silas turned. "Okay, I want to build something too." The sky brightened above them, clouds parting like an invitation. Something real was beginning. Not a second chance. A new one. The scent of vanilla and warm cinnamon hung in the air, clinging to Rachel's sweater like a second skin. She stood in the center of the bakery, surrounded by a storm of flour-dusted sketches, measuring tapes, and open paint samples. The room was alive with possibility and the quiet hum of fear. Julian sat nearby on a padded blanket, gnawing at a silicone teether and babbling at the ceiling fan like it might talk back. "Do you think this color makes the space feel too hopeful?" she asked, holding up a swatch of pale yellow. Miss Hattie, perched on a stool by the window, squinted. "Hopeful is the whole point, baby." Rachel laughed under her breath, then dropped the paint sample and leaned against the counter they hadn't even installed yet. The place was still bones, still raw. But it had a pulse now. The bell above the door jingled, and Silas stepped in with a box under one arm and a worried look in his eyes. "Why do you look like that?" Rachel asked. "Because Byron just called," he said, setting the box down with a careful thud. "There's been talk." Rachel stiffened. "What kind of talk?" Silas ran a hand through his hair. "Some folks in town think we're moving too fast. That this is inappropriate." "Inappropriate?" She echoed, her voice sharper than she meant. "Because I'm not Leona, Miss Hattie." Stood slowly, her eyes narrowing. "That town wouldn't know appropriate if it danced through the square in Sunday lace." Silas gave a tired smile, but it faded quickly. "I don't care what they think. I just don't want it to blindside you." Rachel crossed the room and leaned on the counter across from him. "They don't know what we've built, what we've survived. They don't want to know," Miss Hattie muttered. Rachel looked at Silas carefully. "Does it bother you?" He looked at her, then really looked. "No, but I'd be lying if I said I didn't feel the pressure of Leona's name some days." She nodded, grateful for the honesty. "Me too." There was a long pause where nothing moved but Julian rolling onto his back and squealing at a dust mote dancing in the sunlight. Rachel stepped closer, her voice lower now. "Do you regret this?" Silas didn't answer right away. He walked to Julian, scooped him up, and kissed the top of his head. Then he turned to her child in arms, gaze steady. "I regret waiting so long to believe I deserved joy again." Rachel's eyes filled, but she didn't look away. "Then let them talk," she whispered. "Let them wonder." He reached into the box and pulled out a hand-painted wooden sign. "Wild Grace!" Rachel's breath caught. "That's the name I thought it fit," Silas said, "because that's what you brought into our lives. Not neat grace, not polished or expected, just wild, healing grace." She reached out and traced the letters with her fingertips. "It's perfect." From the corner, Miss Hattie sniffed loudly and waved a hand. "Y'all are gonna make me cry on my clean apron." Rachel laughed, swiping at her own eyes. Too late. Silas set Julian back down and took Rachel's hand. "We're going to face more of this. Whispers, doubts. Grief doesn't just pack up and leave, I know," she said. "But we're not pretending anymore. We're choosing." He kissed her forehead. "Every day." They turned as the bell above the door jingled again. Byron stepped in holding a bouquet of garden wildflowers and a roll of butcher paper. "Hope I'm not interrupting, but the whole town's not against you, you know. Some of us are rooting real loud." Miss Hattie chuckled. "Speak for yourself. I've been rooting since the crying baby on the plane." Rachel took the flowers, her fingers brushing Byron's with gratitude. "Thank you." "Really?" He shrugged, already eyeing the wall space for shelving. The best stories make people uncomfortable before they change minds. Rachel glanced around the room. The mess, the plans, the faces that showed up. Not because they had to, but because they believed. "Let's finish building this place," she said, her voice firm. "Let's open our doors and prove love's not something you earn by checking boxes. It's something you fight for. Something you live through." And when Julian laughed at the sound of her voice when Silas's hand found hers again, she knew. They were doing more than building a bakery. They were building a life. The first morning at Wild Grace opened like a prayer. Soft light spilled across the wide front windows, warming the pale wood floors that still smelled faintly of fresh varnish and lavender oil. The air held the scent of baked apples, cardamom, and sweet cream. A recipe Rachel had created the night before, scribbled in pencil on the back of a grocery list, one arm holding Julian, the other guiding the spoon. Now the doors were unlocked, the sign hung, and the open flag danced gently in the breeze. Rachel stood behind the counter, hands trembling slightly as she tied her apron. Silas was nearby, adjusting a loose shelf bracket with Byron, while Miss Hattie set a plate of warm scones by the register like it was a holy ritual. Julian sat in his high chair in the corner, crumbs already on his cheeks, waving a wooden spoon like a tiny maestro. "You ready?" Silas asked, catching her gaze. Rachel swallowed, nodding slowly. "I think so." He walked over and brushed a stray curl from her face. "You're allowed to be scared." "I'm not scared," she said. "I'm full." Silas smiled. Full of what? Everything she whispered. Hope, gratitude, nerves, love, all of it. He leaned in and kissed her temple. "That's how you know it's real." The bell above the door jingled once, then twice more in quick succession. And just like that, the shop filled. Neighbors, strangers, curious townsfolk who had watched the transformation from afar, and now, drawn by the scent or the story, or maybe both, stepped inside with wide eyes and hesitant smiles. Rachel greeted each one, steadying herself through the rhythm of conversation, the comfort of movement. "Try the cider cake," she said to a gray-haired woman in a denim jacket. Gluten-free lemon loaves on the far tray, she told a mother with a child tugging at her skirt. She didn't notice the tears until one slipped past her cheek, falling quietly into the steam rising from a mug of coffee she'd just poured. Miss Hattie appeared beside her with a clean towel, no words needed. Rachel wiped her face, took a breath, and turned to the next guest. Hours passed in a blur of motion and warmth. Children laughed in the play corner. Old men lingered by the fireplace. The bakery buzzed not with noise, but with the hum of life. At noon, Silas tapped a spoon to a glass and called gently for quiet. Rachel blinked from behind the counter as everyone turned toward the sound. Silas cleared his throat. "Hope y'all don't mind, but I wanted to say a few words. This place, this little corner of heaven, was born out of grief, out of loss." Rachel felt her heart twist, but she didn't look away. "But it didn't stay there," Silas continued. "Because someone came along and reminded me that love isn't something you lose. It's something that changes shape. And when you're lucky, real lucky, it finds a way to grow again." He looked at Rachel, then eyes, steady voice, tender. "This bakery isn't just flour and sugar. It's healing. It's choosing to believe in second beginnings. And it's all because of her." The crowd clapped gently, respectfully. A few sniffles echoed from the back. Rachel blinked rapidly, her hands gripping the counter. Silas walked over to her, his hand reaching for hers in front of everyone. She looked at him. Then around the room. Then at Julian, now sound asleep in Miss Hattie's arms. And for the first time in years, she let herself feel safe in the center of things. She squeezed his hand back and nodded. Later that night, after the last guest had left, and the tables had been wiped down and the lights dimmed to a soft amber glow, Rachel stood outside the bakery with Silas. The sky was clear stars spilling like sugar over the dark hills. "I keep waiting for the other shoe to drop," she whispered. Silas pulled her close. "Maybe it already did. And this is what came after." She leaned her head against his chest. "I used to think the only kind of love that mattered was the kind that swept you off your feet. And now I know the best kind is the one that holds you up when you can't stand. That stays when the storm comes. That makes a home, not just a promise." Silas tilted her chin up. "You made that for us, Rachel. You made this." She smiled through tears. "Not alone." As they stood there beneath the sign that now meant more than she could have dreamed, she heard the softest sound. Julian, asleep in his carrier on the bench nearby, murmured in his dreams. Rachel walked over, touched his cheek, then looked back at Silas. "We're not just surviving anymore," she said. He nodded. "We're living." And as the wind picked up, rustling the branches overhead and lifting the edges of the sign that read, "Wild Grace," Rachel closed her eyes and felt at last at peace. Not because the past was gone, but because the future had finally come.